Welcome to Beyond the X, a podcast for ambitious leaders who are navigating transformation, both inside their organizations and of themselves. Today, I'm joined by Sabrina Mucig, who has spent her career leading these large, complex transformations in very large and complex organizations, the likes of Colgate-Palmolive. Early on in her career, Sabrina made a pretty big career and life decision. She moved to Japan to work in a category she had no prior experience in and work in a culture where she didn't speak the language and didn't fully understand the cultural norms. When she got to Japan, she recognized that many of the things that had made her successful as a leader didn't necessarily translate in the Japanese working culture. For example, she would hear a lot of yeses, but no action or commitment would actually take place. But this isn't actually a story about Japan. What I find fascinating about Sabrina's experience is this is a story about what happens when you act in a way where you assume that you are likely to be misunderstood versus leading in an environment where everyone assumes they understand each other because they speak the same language. Said differently, how would we lead if we assumed that most people didn't actually understand what we were saying and didn't share the same cultural norms? Because while we may all speak the same language inside our organizations, every organization actually has many different dialects. There is the language of global and local, of the executive team and the frontline team, of marketing and finance. And Sabrina's experience is about how do you take a practice of trying to assume you're going to be misunderstood and use that to inform how you communicate and how you build comprehension and ultimately commitment and alignment. So in this conversation, we explore some of the things she learned. We'll talk about how she built that into her leadership practice and why she has gone from being a communicator to actually being a translator in her organization when leading complex global transformations. Let's dive in. My observation photo is you strike me as someone who is very comfortable being uncomfortable. And I think from a leadership point of view, I can imagine that being a very attractive trait to leaders who are like, look, we have this problem opportunity. We don't have an answer, but we need someone who's going to be able to operate in that ambiguity.
Yeah.
But,
Yes.
So you get to Japan, you get to Tokyo.
Yes.
Do you speak Japanese?
No.
Okay. So you get to Japan. Have you ever lived in Japan before?
No.
Okay.
But I had very close friends who lived in Japan and could give great insights.
Okay, fantastic. So you get there, you don't speak the language. It's your first time there, you get a little bit of kind of cultural translation.
Yeah.
In that first year you were there, was there ever a moment where you felt like, maybe I overshot this? Maybe I'm not actually capable of what is required for me to do here?
Definitely. Because I was definitely outside of my comfort zone. And what I realized that some of the things from a Western culture or business culture that had made me successful, I think speed, decisions, movement, results, being result-oriented, would not be necessarily something that will make me successful there. So a lot of things I had to unlearn in a way and be much more, I would say, humble in the way leadership or successful leadership will be in Japan. So, for example, one thing that struck me is that meetings were not a place for alignment. It was a place when a visible alignment will be seen, but there was a lot of work that needed to happen before to ensure that we were creating the condition for the decision to be executed.
So how much of the meeting was a spectacle?
Exactly, where you were acting, a decision was made more than when you were making a decision. So that changes a lot because one of the things that I've realized is people were saying yes. So you thought that they will move, but a yes in Japan doesn't mean, yes, I'm going to do it. It could mean, yes, I understand. Yes, I respect your decision. But it doesn't drive necessarily commitment and action.
So there are two things here that are really interesting. So if meetings are not it sounds like ostensibly it looks like decisions are being made, but they're not actually happening. It's more of a performance. How do decisions get made if not in these meeting type structures?
So the decisions usually are made before the meeting. They call it nemawashi. So this is the preparing the ground for decision to be made. So during nemawashi, you have more one-on-ones. So you identify people who can influence the stakeholder. You spend time listening a lot when you speak the language. When you don't speak the language, because that was also another thing, not everyone was speaking English very well. But there were people who were key in the decision-making process. So how do you identify them and try really to understand what matters for them, what they are worried about, so that you can work on that before the meeting and ensure that everyone is heard and the inputs are taken into account, so that when you go to the meeting, everyone feels that they are heard, their inputs were taken into account, and then the recommendation and then the action is clear for everyone. But you need to do this exercise before.
The other thing you said, though, is that when people say yes, they don't always mean yes in the way we interpret. So how did you get to a place where you knew that you'd gotten the final yes to get moving, and separate between sort of the degrees of yeses that you may have been getting?
Yes, there are different degrees of the hi. How do you pronounce your hi?
Is hi yes in Japanese?
Hi, yes.
Okay.
Yes. So the hi, the hi, the hi. So you learn to go beyond just the verbal, I would say, the verbal expression. You try to understand the body language, the silence, the pose, if people is comfortable, not comfortable. So there are these few elements that will help you in a way, go a little bit deeper to see what the person really means. Now, a lot of things in Japan do not necessarily happen in the work environment. I know that sometimes some people say, hey, why do they go out, have drinks, etc.? But it's also a way in the Japanese culture to be more yourself and maybe continuing the conversation in a setting that is less formal and where you maybe have to play a role. So it was trying also to go more outside and identifying this translator, there were some people who helped me a lot understand that. So making sure that they could help me be a bridge between the Western way of doing things and the Japanese way of doing things. Because among all of that, I would say it's not about judgment. It's really say there are different ways of operating, and how do you adapt to ensure that you are effective at the end of the day.
The culture you're describing of a lot of pre-meeting nemawashi, the pre-meeting consensus, and I would call it like 360 listening to understand what a person is really feeling despite the words that may be coming out of their mouth. How did you prevent decisions from becoming fully decisions by committee? So how did driving to a controversial decisions happen when you couldn't get everyone to agree?
That was hard. Honestly, I want to be transparent. It was hard because understanding the true drivers of a decision was difficult, because what I've realized is that, as you said, the consensus, the group decision is very important. So sometimes it was not rational the way maybe we would have understood. It was more a decision that was taken to preserve some relationships that they were having with retailer, etc. That was more important than necessarily the business impact, you see, because Japanese culture favor or value a lot this harmony and the relationship. So understanding what were the true drivers of decision was hard. And I would say even sometimes for the Japanese people, right? Because you have to really tell why, and sometimes culturally, etc., you cannot necessarily say it.
Although in that
clearly.
example, I wonder how much of it is more of a focus on the long term.
Exactly.
Right? Preserving the partner relationship or the vendor relationship.
Exactly.
Despite, you might not maximize the opportunity in the short term.
Correct.
But actually, I wonder to what extent it's longer term thinking.
It's a lot of longer term thinking. And that was also a shift that I had, and a balance that I had to make between some of the business objective, like that we have for the year, etc., and exactly this more long-term thinking that some of the team were having that I understand, right? Yes. So this balance was important, trying to have maybe goals, KPIs, but also making sure that we were taking enough time and building trust, because to your point, this is about trust at the end of the day.
Yes. Well, I'm curious, again, you show up not speaking Japanese, it's your first time in Japan, you're learning this new, you're trying to embed yourself in this new culture, in this new organization. Were you accepted? And how long did it take for you to be accepted?
I don't think, again, that any foreigner will be fully accepted. But you can win still some trust with the teams. So a few things. First, I think is coming very humble. Humility is critical. And I would say as a leader, yes, you have experience. Yes, you have maybe done great things. But we can see in the world we live in, there is constant change, and you need to constantly, challenge yourself and learn to unlearn, right? So first is humility, asking questions, being curious. It's curiosity towards difference. There is no one right way of doing things. There are several ways maybe of doing things, because what I've realized is that I was shaped more. I thought it was my personality, but I really realized that it was more shaped by my Western or French culture, set of references. So open questions, truly empathizing. Because in several occasions, I find myself, and I had to stop myself, but why are they doing that? I was thinking, doesn't make sense. It's stupid. But then truly understanding the logic, not saying that you agree, you disagree, but understanding that the logic that is used to drive some decision or some behaviors was really helpful, because then I could understand some type of thought process and understand why they were doing what they were doing or reacting a certain way. And that helped me more influence and build the trust, right? And then what matters a lot for people, especially when you don't speak the language, is through your action, walking the talk in a way. Because they could see, okay, Sabrina is not just talking, and they don't like people who talk a lot, to be honest, because it can be seen sometimes as a bit too about bragging, etc. So they value pause, silences, like all these nonverbal cues. And so showing concretely that I was supporting the business, the local business, I could sometimes speak up and say I disagree with the global decisions, because I had understood that for local or Japanese consumers, that was the right thing to do. Then I think that was a way to build the trust. So, and this is quite common. It's not just in Japan.
It is very difficult, because to your point about, you mentioned humility a few times. And again, you strike me as a deeply humble leader in all of the interactions we've had before this. There is a tension here because, and I don't mean to go off the gender train, but let's just go here for a second. A lot of what Western culture teaches you eventually is you have to command the room. You have to speak up. You have to have presence, right? You have to sort of own your space within an environment. And that and humility, they're not necessarily opposites, but it sounds like there was an element where you had to start to temper the way you showed up to really succeed in this very different cultural environment. How did you do that?
You can be ambitious, but humble. And I will use as an example, I'm a tennis player. I loved, recently saw the Nadal documentary.
I watched it after you told me.
Right.
I just have to say one of the most inspiring things I've seen in a long time.
Right. So Nadal is very ambitious. It's very clear, but he has so much humility. You can see that in Roger Federer as well. So I think it's more keeping your drive, your conviction, your ambition, because it was important. But at the same time, as you said, adapt it to be effective. Because at the end of the day, what matters is to get things done. Not just you can say the big things with the right presence, whatever. If people say hi, and then they will not move. So that's what I wanted to do. It's more being effective at the end of the day, trying, because I will not say that I succeed in everything, but trying to be effective and truly understand what drives people, like how to motivate them, what matters for them, what are the resistance. So being people-centric, I think as a leader, is really truly understand what matters for the people you lead. Is what will motivate them, and they will go the extra mile.
So I agree with you. There's an element of, I say to the team whenever they have these issues, I say to them, in this case, I need you to be like an anthropologist of the people working on this, right? Go in and deeply understand their society, essentially, before you can come back and make a recommendation or tell me what we should do, et cetera. But it's tough to do, right? And obviously, the bigger the organization, the more difficult. So how much of this was individually driven? You had to go in and really identify the individual motivations of each individual versus at some point you could start to understand it at a group level or more collective level. Like how deep did you have to go?
I think I mentioned earlier the importance of having allies.
Yes.
So people that had left abroad or had the dual culture, or people that were, great influencers. So I think it was identifying a few people that could help me. I had also a cultural training, and that's very, very important.
What did you learn in the cultural training?
The big thing I learned, among others, because was Japanese, in a way, value as much the process as the end results. And that's very different. So it means that they really want to ensure that the way they do things will be done properly. So it's called, I would say, the concept of kata, K-A-T-A. It's the discipline routine that make excellence repeatable. And that's interesting, the idea of discipline, a routine, excellence, and repeatable. So they spend a lot of time ensuring that they can polish, in a way, a process, always keeping it better and better, because there is the notion of Kaizen, the continuous improvement. But that's something that talks about the longer term as well, that you make it repeatable and scalable. And coming from the US, where we talked about speed, visible results, short-term actions, etc., I think was interesting because it gave me much more appreciation about this notion of process that sometimes maybe, it's just a process that will help make things more repeatable and, scalable and longer term sustainable. So that was, and initially I hadn't understood that, because that was creating resistance sometimes with people, because they're like, it's too fast. It's like, how do we spend more time ensuring it's going to be done properly, etc. And like, no, let's go. Let's
figure it out, yeah.
Well, figuring out is not something that because it was, I think, most of the time making them stressful, because they were coming from a culture where doing things right is important. Processes usually tend to have a negative perception because they say it's against agility. They think that it's bureaucracy, right? But what I've learned from Japan is more a way to, in a way, guide the people into, a way of doing things. But it's not seen as rigid, maybe the way we could see it in the Western world, because there is this notion of Kaizen and continuous improvement, right? But at least it guides the team and allows the repeatability and the scalability. And I know that I've learned something, which is, process is also what bridges strategy and execution impact, right? Let's not see that as, and so without these bridges, a strategy will stay here. And in all my role as, digital transformation or when we had to reorganize the team, I was always trying to have this clarity, at least as a starting point. It may not be the best, process. It has to be simple, because simplicity can allow really actionability. But it's important to really understand how to get it done so that you can start really the machine and then you make it implementable. So there is, you have to be granular and then also go up and strategic at the same time. It's what we call monozukuri.
Okay.
And monozukuri is the pride and responsibility of making something well. And oftentimes I had this example, and maybe we can use it. It was about, in Japan, you have a lot of small dogs, like very small. And these dogs are like baby. It's like a member of the family, okay? So there was so much attention, spent by the owner on, for example, the size of the kibble. Because if it's too big, it's the small dog. So they were measuring the size. You said it's 5 millimeters on the pack. They were checking one by one. Then there was a pack could not be wrinkled because a wrinkled packaging are very important. This is a gift. You can, I would say, the packaging is even more important than what's inside. It's part of the culture of the country. And then also there were some, codes like kawaii. It has to be kawaii because it's small. And what I remember, something that was considered as maybe driving complexity from a global standpoint because, oh my God, they are complaining because the size is not perfect, the perfection. We tend to say progress over perfection. But in the Japanese culture, there is a real pride and even a responsibility to make the thing well. And there is not a consumer, people obsession. You want to do your best to serve your consumers, to serve the people. And in marketing is very important. We tend to say people centricity, etc. But the standards in Japan, in terms of the service, the quality of things is so high. And I realized that sometimes people, it's not that they wanted something perfect, but it was their own, I would say, responsibility as a Japanese person to do it well. You see what I mean?
I do. We've been talking about your experience in Japan coming from the West. And of course, after 2.5 years, you went back to the West. But actually what's been fascinating for me listening to your experience and all the conversations you had before is that some of these challenges you described as perhaps, cultural challenges, decisions aren't made in meetings. People say yes, but they don't mean yes and nothing gets done. These are actually the challenges of every transformation and change management agenda, regardless of culture,
Exactly.
right? I think every marketer has probably been in a position where you heard yes and then nothing happened, right?
Yes.
And so I'm curious how this experience, and you've then since actually, you've then gone on and taken a lot of change management and transformation agenda. So when you went back to the West, what are some of these principles that you brought back to your way of working that have made you successful in these large, ambiguous, complex transformation initiatives?
I think I talked about empathizing, because what I've noticed is that people are not necessarily resistant to change, right? What they want, yes, a clear vision, and then what's in it for them, right? Why, what I'm going to benefit from that as a person, because we tend to say, oh, the organization will be more efficient, etc. But deep down, why is it good for me?
Yeah, what's in it for
So
me?
what's in it for me? And that's a simple question that I think we should. So spending time, and in the recent role as driving the digital transformation, understanding the starting point of the people, because this is something that usually we don't spend enough time, and that varies, and what's in it for them, so that with the vision and the common goal that we have, we understand that there may be different pathways to get there. So not thinking one size fits all, everybody will be so excited about doing what the organization wants, but truly understand the starting point and how do we get there. And having a bit of flexibility in that is helpful, I think.
Maybe I'm still too much in the sort of Japan versus the West culture mindset, but what's fascinating about hearing you describe this is it makes it, I think a lot of leaders focus on communicating, but actually what I think you're highlighting is the importance of the leader as not just being communicator, but almost being a translator.
Yes.
Right? To everyone around them, so that this company's strategy is translated back to you in a language that you
Correct.
can natively speak and understand, so that, again, it answers the question of what's in it for me? Why would I go on this journey?
Right.
And I think a lot of leaders don't translate. They just communicate.
They just communicate. And then I think I'm a lot about collaboration and co-communication, because most of the time, as I said, people agree with the vision, makes sense, but then they need to tangibly see how they can get there. So it's very important to have shared objective and clarity around the KPIs, the key performance indicators, to get there, because it may mean different things for different people. Global team may think of, scalability, consistency as important for them. Local team would think, no, it's about consumer trust. It's about, retailer specificities. It's about, execution. They are not right or wrong, but they don't have necessarily the same starting point. And then they are not necessarily totally aligned on how to get to the same shared, objective. So it's really spending time on both hands and trying to bridge. I think we talked about that, so that everyone can feel like a skin in the game and see how they can contribute and how, they can make it happen. Because it's about ensuring that at the end, people will embrace it. We cannot always, I would say, babysit, but they have to embrace it and push for it, right?
One of the things my coach talks a lot about is the concept of a paradox mindset. And this was absolutely revolutionary for me, where what he said is, at this altitude, the decisions you're making and the things you're thinking about, they oftentimes, people will have two very strong different point of views, and people tend to take a binary camp. It's either, efficiency or retailer or specificity or whatever. But actually, your job as a leader is to embrace the paradox mindset and said, it's actually both. And that's not a contradiction. And that's not how do we have efficiency while optimizing for retailer specificity or whatever the case may be.
Yes.
Now that you recognize this, I think for a lot of folks driving change, communications and translation often feels like an afterthought, right? It's like the last thing they do. So when you're leading this transformation agenda, how much time do you spend thinking about and actually going around and doing that communication translation work?
A lot. I think in my two recent roles, one was more on the more rethinking of the organization of the marketing team to be much more omni-channel driven. And the other one was how do we drive digital transformation within the organization? In both cases, I did a bit of nemawashi maybe and really spend time on the ground, because also leader cannot just stay in their offices, really needed to go talk to the team, engage both professionally, personally as well, because, really understanding what drive them and really understanding, as I said, what's in it, what are the obstacles, etc., so that we can take this input and enrich the approach to get to the objective that, as I said, most of the time everybody agrees upon, right? But it's the how you do it, and not being afraid of rolling up your sleeves and, get your hands dirty. I think this will build trust. This will also ensure that you get the right insights. Because I was talking about in Japan, reaching out to the people who are not speaking English, because it's easy. Like, there were people who were speaking English, so you tend to gravitate towards them, right? But there were lots of insights from the people who did not use the language. So it's the same in more Western culture, reaching out to the more introverted people, not the loudest people, the one who can give you the right insights that will unlock really the best way of driving change.
It's a fascinating insight, because actually I think you're right. As leaders, we probably tend to gravitate to certain kinds of people, right?
Exactly.
Whether they're the loudest, the most opinionated, et cetera. And within any transformation agenda, there is, as you were talking, I was thinking there are kind of these unrepresented voices.
Yes.
Right? That actually probably have a lot of meaningful things to add. And I think it may be easier to spot them when you're like, right, these are the people who don't speak the language. But what do you look for now to determine, which voices have not been factored into how you're thinking about something? Are there certain clues that tell you you're missing the perspective of these kinds of people?
So first, I had to recalibrate myself, because I'm a naturally, I would say, active, loud person, right? No, yes. So I think I had to sometimes say, no, stop talking, listen, pause, and, I would say ask the room for the input. So that was one thing. Also, I was maybe paying a bit more attention to the written aspect, because what I've noticed also in Japan, people sometimes were feeling more comfortable writing things than saying it. For example, I did a 360-degree assessment, so that's very important for me to check really how I come across with my manager, but my peers and also my teams. So that was also something I noticed. So today I will both, in a way, ask for verbal inputs, but also things in writing, because some people feel much more confident. And especially now with all the LLM languages, right? That in a way their delivery, it's better reflecting what they think, while before they could maybe think that their English was not good enough.
Do you think people are more honest in writing?
They can, especially when it's anonymous, right? Yes, they could. Now, you have as a leader also to call out very intentionally your blind spots and say, this is, I know myself. I'm not perfect, and I would love that you call me out because I want to be a better leader. So if you give this permission to people, they don't see it as necessarily a negative. They will say, I'm helping my manager to grow. You have to be comfortable, and not everyone is comfortable.
One of my managers, when I was at Google, gave me this early advice in my 20s, and it always stayed with me. She said, your quirks in your 20s become your calling cards in your 30s. So ask for a lot of feedback so you don't become known for something you don't want to become known for. And I've always thought about feedback as, plugging the blind spots that inevitably all of us have. And don't get me wrong, it's not always easy to hear. And I don't always enjoy hearing in the moment. But more often than not, I'm very grateful that I got it.
Early enough.
Yes, hopefully, not all of it.
Early enough, yes.
The other thing that you've talked a lot about, and you've referenced this multiple times throughout the conversation, is the importance of trust. And the reason why I think this is really important when people take on big change management and transformation agendas is oftentimes you do not have the formal authority to drive the change. So you're in a position where people don't report to you, you don't control their KPIs, you don't control their bonuses. I think most marketers actually spend their whole career operating from a place of influence and not authority. So what did you bring back from your time in Japan, where again you had to balance this influence versus authority, dynamic that you now apply to how you think about building that trust, especially when you don't have formal authority to drive the change?
I would say spending time with the people, getting to know them, not being transactional. I would say maybe it's not being transactional, getting the things done, is really understanding the drivers behind the decision, understanding their starting point. One of my coaches in the past told me you have to play tango with people. I don't know if you know this. So the dance. So I'm seeing something behind your back that you're not seeing, and you're seeing something behind my back that I'm not seeing. So truly asking maybe the question, help me understand why that. Is there something I'm not seeing? So coming with a sense of vulnerability and curiosity allows people, I think, to really say what is happening, and then you can learn how to better influence then the decisions, etc. Because otherwise you will be blinded, and you will have just one part of the reasons. You will move in that direction, and you will let people, on the side. Well, it's so important in any transformation, any change, to bring people along and then let them drive. Yes. You cannot be transforming all the time, so you have to let them go at certain moments. So
I think the tension there is, is a lot of folks driving transformation agendas, probably to your earlier point, feel a degree of need for speed and urgency.
Yeah.
And so how do you balance, what you're describing here, right? Which is, in order to build influence, you have to build trust. That trust comes from investing in actually building relationships where you understand them and they understand you, and you go on this journey together.
Yeah.
But at the same time, the organization needs speed and delivery. So how do you balance those two things?
It's about being clear on first what we all want to achieve, but the KPIs and how do you track progress? Because then if you show that you are moving, it helps in a way balance both the need for movement and progress, while ensuring that you do it I'm not saying a proper way, but you have a roadmap. I think a roadmap for me from all of that, and it's not set in stone, but helps see like the long-term objective, but then the different steps to get there. And this is something I'm trying hard to build quite early on. Again, it can flex, but so that people can visualize a little bit the different steps, and it helps bringing people along with you.
It's such a small thing, but I actually think it's really important, because I think it's not change that people hate, it's uncertainty. And if you can create some degree of, hey, these are some things that might be coming around the corner, people feel safer.
Exactly. Yes, there is a sense of safety, definitely, that is important to keep. But at the same time, you cannot be too safe, because it's also good to... But it's more like, hey, this is preliminary. And that's also something I'm calling preliminary roadmap, with these are the steps. And then communicating where you are, if you have to switch, if you have to change gears, along the way. But then it helps, I think, bringing people along with you without losing sense of where you want to go, because that's also critical for people to go after something that is bigger than them and that, they feel unattainable maybe at the beginning, but showing, the different steps to get there.
If you think about the Sabrina before Japan and the Sabrina after Japan and the Sabrina now,
Yeah.
I know it's been a few years since after Japan. How are those two Sabrinas different?
Much more cultural aware, definitely. Also, I talk about empathy a lot, but I think the Sabrina now is more understanding about why decisions are made, and not much less judgmental. Let's put it that way. maybe much less judgmental, and much more interested in the different ways of getting something done. Maybe I was more rigid in the past, again, for many reasons. While this experience has shown me that there are different ways of getting things done. There is not one way that is right or wrong. Much more aware also about the influence of my upbringing, my influence of my country. I think a lot of things were coming from my personality, and no, it's a lot coming from your culture. These are things that are more subtle, but that shape the way you behave. And I hope, I don't know, maybe we have to ask my husband a little bit more, maybe patient. It was something I had to definitely work on there. And just less afraid of trying new things, because it's going to be okay. At the end of the day, it's going to be okay. And I love what Nelson Mandela quotation, which is, you either win or you learn. And I think it's important to approach any new experience that way. Maybe not winning in the sense winning something, I would say, material or whatever, but there is such learning from all these experiences. So I hope that that taught me a lot, professionally and personally.
The point about rigidity is quite an interesting point, because I think there is this trope of leadership that a leader has to have all the answers and has to have everything figured out, which is why certainly in my earlier stages, I was similar to you. I also felt like I had to be very rigid, because I had to, these are the answers, these rules, because when we see leaders, public leaders, there is always a kind of a conviction, a confidence that feels very boxed and rigid. So I'm curious how letting go of some of this rigidity and perceived conviction, how does that change your effectiveness as a leader?
I think at the end, it's if you want to be effective in, for example, marketing or in business, you have to understand who your audience is, right? When I was in Japan, I was not Japanese. So I had to let go all of the things maybe I knew from Americans, etc., and be truly curious and inquisitive in truly understanding what was mattering for my audience if I wanted to influence, and for my team if I wanted to really influence them. So being clear in terms of who you want to go after, and truly putting yourself in their shoes without your what you have learned maybe before, because it's a different environment, a different set of references that forces you to challenge yourself and be much more, to listen much more, to truly understand what is behind that. So I have an example, I have a 17-year-old daughter, and she's teaching me so much on social media. What is her logic, why she's making some decisions. And that's fascinating because it's very different from what I would have done. But I'm always asking with curiosity. And then, because if she's my audience and I want to, convince her to buy some of my products, I have to understand her logic and see how to influence her. So for me, in the current world with, you see technology that are changing, that we don't know with AI, what in 1 year, 2 year, 3 years, how we're going to have to utilize and how our job will change. Again, it's back to humility, being people-centric, and being curious and challenging yourself.
Do you think curiosity can be taught?
No, I don't think so. I don't think so. However, an environment that fosters curiosity can help you get more curious. And this environment could be, of course, your family, could be also ensuring that when you visit a place on vacation, you don't go to the 5-star hotel. You also spend time looking at other places. It's, not staying with always the same type of people, reading different things. So that can help, I believe. But otherwise, I would say it's more ingrained.
Well, thank you for being so open and teaching me about nemawashi and kata, things I knew nothing about, but I will certainly try and build into my practice.
Yeah.
I do think there are I think the cultural change backdrop is a fascinating mirror on actually what happens a lot inside of organizations. And my hope is that through this experience, people will find things they recognize in their own companies. Maybe there isn't a formal language barrier, but there's probably an informal language barrier.
Yeah.
And take some of these things that you learned and start to apply them to be more effective and more people-centric to drive the change that they're trying to drive. So thank you.
Good.